Mein Gott, I'll never forget the morning of April 28, 1945, when I watched Schwester Elisabeth Weber, a veteran German nurse who'd survived 4 years of war, countless air raids, and the collapse of everything she'd believed in, break down sobbing because an American soldier with a shattered leg called her ma'am, while thanking her for changing his bandages. The spring sun was streaming through the broken windows of our makeshift hospital in the ruins of Würzburg. The smell of disinfectant mixed with dust from collapsed buildings, and Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade was playing softly from an American radio in the ward. Music we'd been forbidden to hear for 12 years, now accompanying a moment of grace that revealed everything about the difference between the world we'd lost and the world we were about to enter. I was Oberschwester Anna Engel-Hartmann, head nurse at Juliusspital in Würzburg, and after 6 years of tending wounded German soldiers who'd fought from Poland to Russia to Normandy, I thought I understood everything about military medicine, about the proper relationship between medical staff and patients, and about the nature of occupation by conquering armies. I'd earned my nickname Engel, Angel, through 4 years of caring for Wehrmacht wounded with dedication that earned respect even from the most hardened soldiers, had witnessed the gradual destruction of German cities and German hopes, and genuinely feared what American occupation would mean for German women working in medical facilities. But what happened during those first 3 weeks after American forces captured Würzburg would shatter every assumption I'd held about American soldiers, about the treatment of defeated enemies, and about the possibility for human dignity to survive total military collapse. Those American patients would teach me that respect wasn't something you earned through victory, but something you offered through character. That courtesy could exist even between former enemies, and that sometimes the simplest words, "Ma'am, please, thank you," carried more power to heal than any medicine in our depleted pharmacy. My journey to that transformative moment began on March 16, 1945, when Allied bombers destroyed most of central Würzburg in a firestorm that killed over 5,000 civilians and left our ancient city in ruins. Juliusspital, one of the oldest hospitals in Germany, survived partially intact, and we immediately began treating casualties from the bombing, mostly civilians, many of them women and children who'd been caught in their homes when the incendiary bombs fell. "Oberschwester Hartmann," said Dr. Friedrich Weber, our chief surgeon, as we worked through the night treating burn victims, "the Americans will be here within weeks. We must prepare for what comes next." His words carried implications that every German woman understood in April 1945. We'd heard stories, some from refugees fleeing the Eastern Front, some from propaganda, some from soldiers who'd witnessed what happened in occupied territories, about what conquering armies did to women in defeated nations. The Soviet advance had been accompanied by systematic violence against German women, and we had no reason to believe American occupation would be different. "What should we do, Herr Doctor?" asked Schwester Elisabeth, a 32-year-old nurse who'd worked at Juliusspital since 1939. "Should we evacuate? Should we hide?" Dr. Weber's response reflected the impossible situation facing German medical personnel in the final weeks of the war. "We stay and continue treating patients. Whatever the Americans do to us, we maintain our duty to the wounded and sick. This is all we can control." So we stayed, continuing to operate our hospital under increasingly desperate conditions as German authority collapsed and American forces approached the city. By late April, we'd run out of most medications. Our surgical equipment was wearing out, and we were treating patients with whatever materials we could improvise from civilian sources. The American arrival on April 6, 1945, was surprisingly anticlimactic. Instead of the violent assault we'd feared, American forces entered Würzburg methodically, securing key positions and establishing control with minimal additional fighting. But for those of us at Juliusspital, the real moment of truth came on April 10th when American military medical personnel arrived to assess our facility and determine its status under occupation. "I am Captain Robert Morrison, U.S. Army Medical Corps," announced the American officer who entered our hospital with a squad of armed soldiers. He spoke careful German with an accent that suggested university training rather than native fluency. "This hospital is now under American military authority. All medical personnel will continue their duties under American supervision." His tone was professional but firm, the voice of a conqueror establishing control over defeated territory. We German nurses stood at attention, waiting to learn our fate. prepared for the worst but hoping for something better. Oberschwester Hartmann, Captain Morrison said, having apparently been briefed on our staff organization, "You will remain as head nurse and continue supervising German medical staff. American wounded will be brought here for treatment, and you will provide the same standard of care you've given to German patients." The order to treat American wounded was expected. Geneva Convention requirements mandated medical care for all casualties regardless of nationality. But Captain Morrison's next statement revealed something about American military culture that I hadn't anticipated. All German medical personnel will be treated with respect appropriate to medical professionals. American soldiers will address nurses as ma'am or by professional title, will follow hospital regulations, and will maintain proper behavior at all times. This formal courtesy seemed impossible given the circumstances. These were conquering soldiers who'd fought their way across Europe, who'd lost friends to German weapons, who'd witnessed concentration camps and German atrocities. Why would they show respect to enemy nurses working in a defeated nation? But my skepticism about American promises evaporated on April 12th, when the first American casualties arrived at Julius-Spittal. 12 soldiers wounded during final operations to secure Würzburg and surrounding areas. These young men, many no older than the German soldiers we'd been treating for years, were carried into our wards with injuries ranging from minor shrapnel wounds to severe trauma, requiring immediate surgery. "Ma'am," said the first American patient I treated, a 19-year-old private from Ohio with a bullet wound in his shoulder, "I appreciate you taking care of me, even though we're enemies." His courtesy was shocking because it was genuine rather than sarcastic. This boy, and he was just a boy, barely old enough to shave properly, was thanking an enemy nurse for providing medical care that Geneva Convention required, addressing me with respect that contradicted everything I'd been told about American barbarism and lack of civilization. "It is my duty," I replied in my careful English, "to treat all wounded regardless of uniform." "Yes, ma'am," he said, wincing as I cleaned his wound. "But you're doing a good job of it, and I wanted you to know I appreciate it." This exchange established a pattern that would repeat itself dozens of times over the following days as more American casualties arrived at Julius-Spittal. Every soldier, from privates to officers, addressed German nurses with courtesy that seemed impossible given the circumstances of our meeting. But the moment that truly shattered my assumptions came on April 15th, when Schwester Elizabeth was assigned to care for a severely wounded American lieutenant who'd been caught in a German ambush during final resistance operations. Lieutenant James Henderson had sustained multiple shrapnel wounds, a fractured leg, and internal injuries that required Dr. Weber's finest surgical skills to repair. "Schwester, Dr. Bay," Weber told Elizabeth before the surgery, "this American officer will require intensive post-operative care. You're assigned as his primary nurse for the next week." Elizabeth's face went pale. Caring for enemy officers in their most vulnerable moments seemed dangerous. What if he blamed her for German atrocities? What if he expected services beyond medical care? What if American command thought she was being treated too well by having a dedicated nurse? But her fears proved unfounded in ways that would change her understanding of American military culture and human decency. When Lieutenant Henderson regained consciousness after surgery, his first words to Elizabeth were, "Thank you, ma'am. I'm told you saved my life." "The doctor saved your life, Herr Lieutenant," Elizabeth replied. "I only assisted." "Ma'am," Henderson said with effort, "the doctor operated, but you're the one who'll keep me alive during recovery. That makes you pretty important in my book." His gratitude seemed genuine, but what truly affected Elizabeth came during the following days, as she provided round-the-clock care for this American officer. Every time she entered his room, he greeted her with courtesy. Every time she changed his bandages or administered medication, he thanked her. Every time she helped him with basic needs that wounded patients couldn't handle independently, he apologized for the inconvenience and expressed appreciation. "Oberschwester," Elizabeth said to me after 3 days of caring for Lieutenant Henderson, "I don't understand these Americans. This officer treats me better than most German officers treated nurses, even though I'm an enemy nurse caring for him only because he's a prisoner in our hospital." Her confusion reflected broader German surprise at American behavior during the occupation's early days. We'd been taught that Americans were crude materialists without proper culture or respect for traditional values. Instead, we encountered soldiers who practiced courtesy as consistently as they practiced military discipline. But the transformative moment, the incident that would become symbolic of everything we learned about American character, came on April 28th, when Elizabeth was changing Lieutenant Henderson's bandages during his morning care routine. The procedure was painful because his wounds were still healing, and Henderson gritted his teeth while she worked. "I'm sorry, Herr Lieutenant," Elizabeth said. "I try to be gentle, but—" "Ma'am," Henderson interrupted, speaking German with the same Ohio accent I'd noticed in other American soldiers. "You don't need to apologize. You're doing a difficult job with limited supplies, and you're doing it well. I appreciate everything you've done for me." Something in his tone, the genuine gratitude combined with recognition of the difficult circumstances under which German nurses were working, broke through Elizabeth's professional composure. Tears began streaming down her face as she continued working, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to maintain medical precision while confronting emotions she'd suppressed for weeks. "Schwester," Henderson said gently, "are you all right?" "Ja, Herr Lieutenant," Elizabeth replied, wiping her eyes. "I apologize for this unprofessional behavior. I will complete your treatment properly." But Henderson wasn't concerned about professionalism. He was concerned about Elizabeth's obvious emotional distress. "Ma'am, you've been working 16-hour days treating enemy wounded while your own city lies in ruins. You're entitled to feel however you need to feel. Don't apologize for being human." His words acknowledged not just Elizabeth's professional service, but her personal circumstances and emotional reality. For 4 years, German nurses had been expected to maintain perfect professional demeanor, regardless of personal feelings, to suppress emotion in service of duty, to sacrifice our own needs for the care of wounded soldiers. And here was an American lieutenant, an enemy officer who should have despised German nurses for serving the Nazi regime, treating Elizabeth with understanding and compassion that recognized her humanity beyond her professional role. "Why are you kind to me?" Elizabeth finally asked. "We are your enemies. Germans killed your friends, tried to kill you. Why do you call me ma'am and thank me for doing what Geneva Convention requires?" Henderson's response revealed something profound about American military culture and the values that shaped American soldier behavior. "Ma'am, my country didn't send me to Europe to hate Germans. We came to defeat Nazi Germany and end the war. Now that the fighting's over, you're not my enemy. You're a nurse doing her best to help wounded people under terrible circumstances. That deserves respect, regardless of what uniform you used to support." His distinction between defeating Nazi Germany and hating individual Germans reflected American capacity to separate political opposition from personal hatred in ways that European military traditions rarely achieved. Germans had been taught to hate our enemies personally, to view them as threats to German survival. Americans seemed capable of fighting fiercely while maintaining recognition of enemy humanity. Elizabeth's breakdown that morning became symbolic of what many German nurses experienced during those early weeks of American occupation. We'd expected brutality, violence, or at minimum cold indifference from conquering soldiers. Instead, we encountered courtesy, respect, and recognition of our professional dedication that forced us to reconsider everything we'd been taught about American character. "These Americans are different from what we were told," Elizabeth said to me that evening. "They're not barbarians or cultural inferiors. They're decent human beings who treat even enemy nurses with respect." Her observation reflected growing recognition among German medical staff that American occupation was fundamentally different from what we'd feared. But this recognition also created complex emotions about the regime we'd served and the propaganda we'd believed. Over the following weeks, as more American casualties arrived at Julius Spittal and German nurses gained experience treating enemy wounded, the pattern of mutual respect between German medical staff and American patients became increasingly pronounced. American soldiers consistently thanked nurses for medical care, apologized for creating extra work when their wounds required extensive treatment, and expressed admiration for German medical staff who maintained professional standards despite working under desperate conditions. "Ma'am," said Corporal Danny O'Sullivan, a cheerful Irish-American kid from Boston, "you ladies are doing a hell of a job with basically no supplies and working in a building that's half rubble. My mum's a nurse back home, and she'd be impressed by what you've accomplished here." His comparison of German nurses to his mother offered as genuine compliment rather than patronizing comment, reflected American capacity to recognize professional competence regardless of national origin or wartime allegiance. But American courtesy extended beyond just polite words to concrete actions that demonstrated genuine respect for German medical personnel. When American supply units began delivering medical supplies to Julius Spittal, they included not just materials for treating American wounded, but supplies for general hospital operations that benefited all patients. "Captain Morrison," I said during one of our coordination meetings, "these supplies are more than necessary for treating American casualties. Why are you providing materials for German patients as well?" His response revealed American approaches to occupation that prioritized humanitarian concerns over punishment of defeated enemies. Oberschwester Hartmann, this hospital serves the entire Würzburg community, not just American wounded. If we provide adequate supplies only for our own soldiers, while German patients suffer from medical shortages, we'd be violating the basic principle that all human life has value. This philosophy reflected American values about human dignity and universal rights that German military culture had never fully embraced. We'd been taught that German lives mattered more than enemy lives, that our nation deserved priority over others. Americans seemed to believe that all human lives had equal value, regardless of nationality or political allegiance. The practical impact of American generosity became apparent as Julius Spittal operations improved dramatically due to American supply support. We received antibiotics that saved lives previously doomed to infection, surgical supplies that allowed Dr. Weber to perform procedures that had been impossible with our depleted inventory, and basic materials like clean bandages that transformed our ability to provide proper wound care. "These Americans are rebuilding our hospital while we're still technically at war," observed Dr. Weber during a staff meeting. "They're treating German medical personnel as colleagues rather than as conquered enemies. This suggests something important about how American occupation will differ from what we feared. But perhaps the most profound demonstration of American respect for German nurses came through personal interactions that transcended professional duty and revealed genuine human connection between former enemies. Lieutenant Henderson's recovery provided the most visible example of this transformation. As his wounds healed and his strength returned, he spent increasing time talking with Elizabeth about life in America, about his family, about his hopes for post-war peace. "Ma'am," he said one afternoon, "I want to thank you not just for the medical care, but for treating me like a human being rather than just an enemy patient. You could have done your job mechanically, provided minimum necessary care, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you've been kind, patient, and genuinely concerned about my well-being." Elizabeth's response revealed how much her perspective had changed during 3 weeks of caring for American wounded. "Herr Lieutenant, you and your fellow soldiers have taught me that enemies can become friends when they recognize each other's humanity. Every time you called me ma'am, every time you thanked me for doing my duty, you reminded me that respect and decency can survive even the worst conflicts." These interactions between German nurses and American patients created bonds that transcended national boundaries and military allegiances. We were no longer German nurses caring for American enemies. We were medical professionals caring for human beings who happened to wear different uniforms. But the transformation wasn't limited to individual relationships. American military authorities actively promoted cooperation between German and American medical personnel in ways that suggested occupation goals extended beyond just military control. "Oberschwester Hartmann," Captain Morrison told me in mid-May, "American Medical Command wants to establish training programs where German nurses can learn American medical techniques and American nurses can learn from German medical traditions. Would your staff be interested in participating?" His proposal was revolutionary because it treated German and American medical knowledge as equally valuable and suggested that former enemies could learn from each other rather than one side imposing its methods on the defeated party. "Captain," I replied, "German nurses would be honored to participate in such exchanges. We have much to learn from American medicine, and perhaps we can share some techniques that might benefit your medical personnel." These training programs began in June 1945 and provided opportunities for German nurses to observe American medical practices while demonstrating German nursing techniques to American counterparts. The mutual respect and professional courtesy that characterized these exchanges reflected broader American occupation policies that emphasized reconstruction over revenge. "You know what strikes me most about American nurses?" Elizabeth said after attending her first joint training session. "They treat us as professional equals, not as inferior representatives of a defeated nation. They're genuinely interested in learning from our experience." This attitude reflected American democratic values that emphasized individual merit over national origin or political affiliation. German nurses were judged by their professional competence rather than by their association with the Nazi regime, creating opportunities for redemption and reconstruction that we'd never expected during the final desperate months of the war. But the most meaningful validation of the respect American soldiers showed to German nurses came through personal correspondence that continued long after individual soldiers had been discharged and returned home. Lieutenant Henderson wrote to Elizabeth from Ohio in December 1945, "Dear Schwester Weber, I wanted to write and let you know that I've fully recovered from my wounds and have returned to civilian life. But I'll never forget the care you provided during my darkest days, or the courage it took for you to treat enemy wounded with dedication when your own world was collapsing around you. You taught me that professionalism and human decency can survive even the worst circumstances, that enemies can recognize each other's humanity when they choose to look beyond uniforms and political differences. The respect you showed to American patients, despite everything you'd suffered during the war, demonstrated character that would be admirable in any culture or nation. Thank you for being my nurse, for treating me with care when you could have provided minimum necessary attention, and for showing me that German people weren't the monsters Nazi propaganda had made them seem." Similar letters arrived from other American soldiers who'd been treated at Julius Spittal, each expressing gratitude for German nursing care and acknowledging the difficult circumstances under which we'd worked. These personal connections between former enemies helped German nurses understand that American soldiers distinguished between Nazi political leadership and ordinary Germans who'd been caught up in circumstances beyond their control. This distinction created possibilities for reconciliation that wouldn't have existed if Americans had treated all Germans as equally guilty for Nazi crimes. My own understanding of American character and democratic values continued to develop through ongoing interactions with American medical personnel during the occupation period. Captain Morrison became a friend who helped me understand American perspectives on democracy, individual rights, and the proper relationship between government and citizens. "Anna," he said during one of our conversations, "we'd progressed to first-name basis as our professional relationship evolved into genuine friendship. The difference between America and Nazi Germany isn't just about political systems, it's about fundamental beliefs regarding human dignity and individual worth. Americans believe that all people deserve respect, regardless of their status, nationality, or political allegiance. This philosophy explained why American soldiers called German nurses Ma'am, why they thanked us for providing care that Geneva Convention required, why they treated us as professionals rather than as conquered enemies. Their courtesy reflected deeper values about human dignity that Nazi ideology had rejected, but that American democracy embraced." The final validation of these lessons came in 1946, when I was invited to participate in a conference on post-war medical cooperation between American and German medical professionals. The meeting brought together nurses, doctors, and administrators from both nations to discuss rebuilding German healthcare infrastructure with American assistance. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the American conference chairman, "we're here not as victors and vanquished, but as medical professionals committed to healing and to building better healthcare systems for all people, regardless of nationality." The German nurses and doctors in this room demonstrated professional dedication during the darkest days of the war, maintaining standards of care that honored medical ethics, even when their government honored nothing. They deserve our respect and our support. His words acknowledged German medical professionals' complex position during the Nazi period, serving patients while the regime we'd been forced to serve committed atrocities. But rather than condemning us for association with Nazi Germany, American medical leadership recognized our professional dedication and offered opportunities for reconstruction and redemption. This generous approach to post-war relations helped Germany rebuild not just physically but morally, creating democratic institutions and professional standards that could never have developed if American occupation had been punitive rather than reconstructive. My post-war career continued in medical education, where I trained new generations of German nurses using combined German and American medical techniques. But I always emphasized the broader lessons about human dignity and professional respect that I'd learned from American soldiers during those transformative weeks in April and May 1945. Students, I would tell each new nursing class, I want to share a story about what it meant when American soldiers called German nurses ma'am during the occupation. These simple words represented profound respect for professional dedication and human dignity that transcended national boundaries and military conflicts. The story of Elizabeth Weber crying when Lieutenant Henderson thanked her became legendary in German nursing education, a symbol of how simple courtesy and genuine respect could heal wounds deeper than any physical injury. This was my story, Oberschwester Anna Engel-Hartmann, who learned that respect wasn't earned through victory but offered through character, that courtesy could bridge the deepest divisions between former enemies, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine was treating people with the dignity they deserved regardless of circumstances. My experience with American soldiers taught me that democratic values weren't just political abstractions, but practical commitments to treating all people with respect, that professionalism could survive even the worst conflicts, and that former enemies could become friends when they recognized each other's humanity beyond uniforms and nationalities. What struck you most about why American soldiers calling German nurses ma'am meant so much during occupation? Have you heard similar stories about how simple courtesy transformed relationships between former enemies? These personal testimonies help us understand how individual acts of respect can have profound historical consequences. If you want to hear more first-hand accounts like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow we'll be sharing the story of Major Sarah Angel Mackenzie, an American Army nurse who discovered how medical professionalism could transcend the bitterness of war. These voices from the past deserve to be heard. Let's make sure their stories live on.